Chapter 3. Insect Pests of Tough Grasses. Learning Objectives. After study of the material in this chapter, you should be able to 1. Explain the difference between complete and gradual metamorphosis. 2. Describe chinch bug damage to turf. 3. Identify 4 pests that might cause root damage to turf. 4. Explain how frequent mowing impacts fire ants. 5. Describe 3 ways to find turf insects in the soil. 6. Explain the role of traps in monitoring turf insects. 7. Describe 4 pest control problems caused by a thick thatch layer. 8. Describe 3 types of organisms used in biological control of turf insects. 9. Explain why some insecticide formulations should be watered in. 10. Explain why a granular formulation would be used on a site without irrigation. Terms to know. Developmental stage. Gradual metamorphosis. Complete metamorphosis. Sampling. Monitoring. Resistant cultivar. Endophyte. Predator. Grub. Caterpillar. Larva plural, larvae. Parasite. Pupa plural, pupae. Pathogen. Nymph. Bee. T. Scouting. Milky spore disease. Insect pests of tough grasses. Many insects damage turf, but most of the damage is done by only a few species. You need to be able to identify the most common turf insect pests and learn which developmental stages are likely to cause problems and which stages are vulnerable to various treatment choices. For example, grubs and caterpillars are 2 different types of turf-damaging larvae, the young worm-like stage of beetles and moths. If you find a large population of adult insects, you are likely to find large numbers of the destructive larvae as soon as eggs hatch. When you read the pest descriptions below, notice which stages of development cause turf damage. Insect pests of tough grass undergo either gradual or complete metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is a change of form. The young stages or nymphs of insects that undergo gradual metamorphosis look like small versions of the adult. In contrast, the young stages of insects that go through complete metamorphosis look very different from the adults before they become pupae and change into adults. The immature stage of most beetles is a grub. The immature stage of moths is a caterpillar. Complete metamorphosis is the most common type of development among toughgrass pests. Identifying insect pests. The following sections of this chapter describe common toughgrass insects. Except for the red imported fire ant, they have been grouped by the type of feeding or damage that they do because insect damage is often more noticeable than the pest itself. Following the steps of a key to turf damage will help you narrow down the pest species that may be causing the problem. See the resources section for keys to insect identification and damage. Keep in mind that many pests cause similar types of injury and that it is often impossible to identify the pest on the basis of damage alone. Pests that feed on leaves and stems. Cutworm. The black cutworm and bronze cutworm both attack turf. Cutworms hide in burrows or aeration holes during the day. At night, they clip the turf surrounding the burrow, resulting in brown circles or streaks on the lawn. Damage on tall grass may not show. Thresholds vary with the situation. On a putting green, the threshold is very low from 1 to 2 larvae per square yard. On other sites, it may range from 3 to 8 larvae per square yard. Life cycle: cutworms usually spend the winter as larvae in the soil under the turf. As spring arrives, the caterpillars feed on grass leaves. Once fully grown, they dig into the soil again to molt into the pupal stage. They emerge from the pupa as adult moths. The black cutworm has 2 or more generations per year. The bronze cutworm has 1. New moths feed on flower nectar and mate at night. Females seek out turf and lay up to 300 eggs. Predators often eat most of these eggs. In golf tees and greens where the routine use of pesticides eliminates predators and parasites, massive infestations of cutworms sometimes occur. Armyworm. The fall armyworm and yellow-striped armyworm are more commonly found in southern and transition turf zones. Armyworms sometimes feed together and mow the turf in an ever-expanding front. Armyworms do not burrow into thatch or soil during the day. Life cycle. The fall armyworm has continuous generations during the year and development merely slows down during the cooler winter months. Billbug. The bluegrass billbug is most common in cool-season tufgrasses. The hunting or zoysia billbug is most common in transition zone and warm-season turf grasses, but it attacks all types. Billbug grubs bore into the stems of grasses until they are too large to fit inside. Billbug damage is easy to diagnose by grabbing hold of the dead Chapter 3. Insect pests of tufgrasses turf and pulling up. If the stems break off easily at the ground level, look at the broken edges. Billbug larvae leave hollow stems and sawdust-like waste called frass. Feeding by large numbers of billbug grubs during the winter months may kill or delay greening of zoysia, Bermuda grass, and St. Augustine grass. No thresholds are available for billbugs, but treatments should be directed against active adults or applied when young grubs are detected in the turf. Life cycle. The bluegrass billbug has a single generation per year. Adults spend the winter in the turf and surrounding areas, and females lay eggs in grass stems in early spring. Grubs hatch from the eggs, feed in turf through early July, and pupate in the soil. New adults emerge from mid-July through August. The hunting billbug appears to have one major generation per year, but adults and grubs remain active over much of the summer. Pests that discolor leaves and stems. Sometimes damage to turf appears as yellow or brown patches. You will need to determine whether these symptoms are caused by insect feeding or by disease. Some pests discolor turf by sucking juices out of leaves and stems. The most important pest in this group is the hairy chinch bug. Chinch bug. The hairy chinch bug is associated with cool-season tufgrasses, especially fine fescues and perennial ryegrass. The southern chinch bug does not survive heavy freezes and is most commonly associated with Bermuda grass and St. Augustine grass. In areas where chinch bugs remain active all season and pesticides are commonly applied, southern chinch bugs have become resistant to common insecticides. Using resistant tufgrass cultivars and switching to other classes of insecticides should help manage pesticide-resistant chinch bugs. During cool, moist periods, chinch bugs are susceptible to infections from naturally occurring fungi. Therefore, watering regularly during the time that chinch bugs are active may cause them to be killed by disease. Because chinch bugs tend to feed in clusters, damage first appears as circular patches of yellowing turf that resemble drought injury. Large infestations of the southern chinch bug may completely kill St. Augustine grass lawns. A threshold of 15 to 20 chinch bugs per square foot is suggested for all species. Use the flotation technique described on page 41 for sampling. Life cycle. Chinch bugs undergo gradual metamorphosis with nymphs and adult stages present during spring, summer, and fall. Pests that feed on roots. White grubs and mole crickets are the most serious root-feeding pests of tufgrass in the southeastern states. Almost no turf is immune from white grub attack. The immature stage or larvae of the Japanese beetle, green June beetle, masked chafer, and oriental beetle are white grubs. In cool-season turf, the major grub pests are usually Japanese beetle grubs and masked chafers. In southern and transition zones, the green June beetle grubs are more common. All white grubs can be transported in sod or in soil of ornamental plants. Although the species described here all have one generation per year, control strategies are slightly different. Eggs of pests that hatch into white grubs need moist soil. If there has been no rain during the late summer when beetles and masked chafers are laying eggs, do not irrigate even though the turf may go dormant. Irrigating to keep the turf green only makes it more attractive for egg laying and improves egg survival. If grubs are already established in a lawn, it is wise to keep irrigation going to help the turf recover from the loss of roots. Moist soil also encourages the grubs to remain at the soil thatch level where biological controls or insecticides will be most effective. Japanese beetle. Japanese beetle grubs feed on roots and organic matter at the soil thatch junction. Heavily infested turf turns brown in dry weather and may die out in patches. Life cycle: adults emerge from the ground from mid-June through July. They congregate on trees, especially fruit trees, shrubs, and other plants, to feed and mate. Females dig into turf to lay groups of eggs. The tiny grubs hatch in 9 to 30 days, depending on temperatures and moisture. The grubs feed until cold temperatures signal the time to dig into the soil for overwintering. When the soil warms in April, the grubs return to the surface to finish feeding. When fully grown, they dig down into the soil and form an earthen pupal cell where it takes 2 to 3 weeks for the pupa to develop into the adult. Green June beetle. Although green June beetles do not eat grass roots, the larvae emerge from a central burrow at night to feed on thatch or manure. They often push up mounds of soil around their burrows that look like miniature mole tunnels, and they loosen the soil and uproot grass seedlings. Once at the surface, the grubs crawl on their backs. During the summer, green June beetle adults feed on ripe fruits and sap from wounds on trees. Life cycle: females lay eggs in turf or under livestock manure. Grubs emerge to feed on organic matter. They pupate underground. Masked chafer. Turf heavily infested with masked chafers shows drought stress and dead patches that do not recover after irrigation. Wildlife often dig around the dead patches, and moles sometimes tunnel where grub populations are high. Infested turf feels spongy and lifts easily. Adults are often mistaken for May-June beetles. Life cycle: adult beetles emerge from the turf from mid-June to mid-July. Each night, females come to the surface, release a pheromone, sex attractant odor, and mate. After mating, the females may dig back down into the turf or fly a short distance before returning to the soil. Masked chafer adults do not feed, and they fly only at night. Mole cricket. Tawny and southern mole crickets are the most damaging insect pests of warm-season tufgrasses in the southern states. The tawny mole cricket is mainly vegetarian. The southern mole cricket often feeds on other insects. Mole cricket adults and nymphs damage turf roots and churn up the soil so that roots dry out. To manage mole crickets, you need to track the development of the nymphs. Monitoring of spring adult tunneling is a good predictor of where nymphs are likely to occur and where insecticide should be applied. The best time to treat is after all the eggs have hatched, generally in mid-June to early July, depending on location. Life cycle: over most of their range, mole crickets spend the winter months as adults or nearly mature nymphs. Heavy flights often occur after warm spring rains. From March through May, adults mate, and females dig 3 to 10 inches into the soil and lay several clutches of eggs over several weeks. The eggs hatch in about 20 days, and the young nymphs dig to the surface to begin feeding. Young nymphs are common in late May through June. The nymphs molt 6 to 8 times over the summer, and most mature by the end of October. The new adults may dig deep into the soil during dry or cool conditions. The red imported fire ants build mounds in open areas, often near stumps and other objects. Colonies also occur in or under buildings. Red imported fire ants readily swarm from the mound to sting when the mound is disturbed. Some people are highly allergic to fire ants, and people and animals sometimes die from fire ant stings. Colonies frequently migrate from one site to another, and flooding can cause colonies to leave their mounds and float until they can reach land to establish a new mound. A queen and a half-dozen workers can start a new colony several hundred feet away from the original nest almost overnight. Cultural control. Frequent mowing is a non-chemical control method that golf course managers use to force red imported fire ant colonies to less disturbed areas. The more times areas are mowed, the less time fire ants have to establish colonies. For example, greens can be mowed 7 times a week, tee boxes and fairways 3 times a week, and roughs once a week. Spot treatments may be needed on roughs only. Chemical control. Broadcast baits and apply individual mound treatments using dusts, granules drenched with water after application, liquid drenches, baits, or aerosol injections. In areas with just a few ant mounds can be treated individually. This approach preserves beneficial insects as well as native ant colonies which compete with red imported fire ants. Castes. Fire ant communities are made up of different castes or groups with well-defined roles for colony survival. Worker ants feed the queen and protect her by defending the nest from intruders and by moving the queen from danger. They also search for food and care for the developing brood. The brood is made up of tiny, cream-colored eggs, grubs, and pupae of all the castes. The wingless worker ants generally live about 5 weeks. Winged ants or reproductives live in the mound until their mating flight. Mating flights are most common in spring and fall in the afternoon soon after a rainy period. Males die soon after mating. The newly fertilized queen digs a chamber in which to start a new colony. A mature queen can lay up to 800 eggs per day. The average colony contains 100,000 to 500,000 workers and up to several hundred winged ants and queens. Queen ants can live 7 years or more. Finding pests. To manage insects in turf, you need to know when and how to look or scout for them and how to identify them. You can use several methods to sample for insect pests in turf. Select one that is appropriate for the location and habits of the pest. If you find a pest, you also need to know whether it is causing enough problems to justify control. This may mean monitoring the numbers found over a period of time. Some insects will always be present in turf, but they will not always cause damage that makes control necessary. Inspect the turf. Taking a close look at the turf is probably the best way to detect pests. This means getting down close enough to see individual leaf blades and the base of the plants. Always check the turf where the damaged area meets the green, healthy grass. This is where the insects are likely to be most abundant. Spread the turf and look at the base of the stems for insects or discoloration. Grab hold of the turf and pull up. If the turf breaks off easily, look for the sawdust-like waste of billbugs. If the turf pulls up, cut a flap and sift through the soil for white grubs. Soap and water flush. To detect mole crickets, armyworms, and other caterpillars, mix 2 ounces of dishwashing liquid in 4 gallons of water and pour it over a square yard of turf in an area where you suspect an infestation. The insects will be irritated by the dishwashing liquid and rise to the surface. Flotation. Cut the top and bottom off a large coffee can or other cylinder and push it down into an area of yellowed and declining turf. Fill the can with water. Wait 5 minutes for chinch bugs and other turf-inhabiting insects to float to the surface for counting. Repeat at 3 or 4 other places in the suspected area. Action thresholds. Although tufgrass management manuals and other publications list action threshold levels for certain pests, you should keep in mind that these thresholds are only suggestions and that many other factors will influence the quality of the turf. Threshold suggestions also change over time. In the past, controls were recommended for annual grubs when populations reached 6 to 10 per square foot. We now know that with good irrigation and fertilizer management even 20 or more grubs per square foot may not cause noticeable damage. The goal for pest management is not to eliminate every pest, but to keep damage at an acceptable level. At any site, you will probably need a combination of cultural, biological, and chemical controls. Using traps to monitor insects. Light traps, moths of cutworms and many of the night-flying beetles can be collected in light traps. These generally use an ultraviolet UV bulb that attracts most night-flying insects. By running a trap for several nights and counting the numbers of adult insects that will produce turf-damaging caterpillars, grubs, or cutworms, you can predict when turf damage could occur. After you catch large numbers of moths or beetles, wait 10 to 14 days and then look for cutworms by using the soapy water method or look for white grubs under a slice of turf. Pheromone traps. Pheromone traps have been developed for the Japanese beetle adult and the black cutworm moth. Pheromone traps will let you monitor a single species. You should be aware that traps for Japanese beetles actually attract far more beetles than they catch and may create more problems. Pitfall traps. Billbugs can be monitored by using a 16-ounce cup buried up to the rim in or next to turf. Billbug adults fall into the trap and can be counted to monitor the beginning of activity in the spring. Petroleum jelly applied in a band near the top of the cup will prevent billbugs from crawling out. After 2 weeks of steady captures, it is time to consider control action for adults. Cultural control. Healthy, dense tuffgrass is much better able to withstand pests than weak, thin stands. When you consider the pest problems at any site, try to find out whether the turf is getting adequate management. Review the turf management recommendations in Chapter 2. Although applying a pesticide may feel like a positive step in dealing with a pest problem, making adjustments in cultural practices can be just as effective and is more likely to prevent future pest problems. Different pests have different needs for moisture. Once you have identified a pest problem at any site, check whether irrigation may make a problem better or worse. Thatch and insect pests. Take a look at the thatch buildup at any site. Keeping thatch below ½ an inch thick has several benefits for pest management. It reduces winter shelter for many pests. Thick thatch creates a more uniform humidity zone for cutworms and chinch bugs. Thinner thatch allows the soil surface to dry out. Billbug larvae and sometimes white grubs feed on thatch. Thatch hinders the movement of biological controls or pesticides. Thatch may bind a pesticide so tightly that it does not get through to the soil to come into contact with the target pest. Matted thatch may prevent irrigation or rainwater from reaching the soil and will keep out the water that is necessary to wet in certain pesticides. Resistant cultivars and pests. Some tuffgrasses are especially attractive to pests or may decline badly when pests attack. Other species and cultivars of tuffgrasses appear to have natural resistance or tolerance to insect pests. Your local cooperative extension center may have a list of tuffgrasses that rates performance for different areas and different uses. When establishing new turf or carrying out a renovation, use the most resistant cultivars. Most perennial ryegrasses and tall fescues contain an endophyte, a fungus that lives within the plant. This fungus, which does not seem to harm the turf, produces toxins that may kill chinch bugs, billbugs, and turf caterpillars. Biological control. Most insect pests have naturally occurring enemies, and you will want to protect these natural enemies when making management decisions. You may also decide to buy and use insects, parasites, and disease organisms to control a pest. This pest management technique is called biological control. Bacteria, fungi, insects, mites, and nematodes that are damaging to various pest species are on the market. Not all of these biological control agents are really useful for pest management, but some work well if an appropriate species can be applied correctly in a timely way. Biological controls are usually described as predators, parasites, and pathogens or disease-causing organisms. Because they are living organisms, biological control agents need special handling. Always read the instructions for storage and application. Biological control choices. Predator: these insects actively seek out their prey and attack them. Predators such as bigeed bugs, earwigs, lacewings, ground beetles, lady beetles, and rove beetles feed on various insect and mite eggs, caterpillars, chinch bugs, and aphids. Commonly used insecticides also kill most of these predators, so you should not apply turf insecticides as preventive treatments unless insect pests are a serious problem. Once naturally occurring predators have been killed, pest species may get worse or a different pest may become a problem. Parasites: several wasps seek white grubs and caterpillars in order to paralyze them, lay an egg, and provide food for their larvae. Several strains of parasitic nematodes that kill cutworms, billbugs, and white grubs are now available. Some of these nematodes search out insects and enter their bodies through natural openings or by drilling through the skin. Once inside the insect, the nematodes release bacteria that kill the pest within hours. The nematodes then complete their development within the body of the dead insect and produce new infective nematodes. These nematodes that attack insects are different from the nematode species that infect plants. As with most biological controls, getting good results from parasitic nematodes can be difficult. The nematodes are very susceptible to drying and sunlight, and they should be applied to the turf with water, preferably in the morning or evening. Daily watering may be required for a week or more after application. Be sure to obtain the strains that are most active against turf caterpillars, billbugs, or white grubs. Pathogens: from time to time, most turf insect pests are infected by bacterial and fungal diseases. Some of these disease-causing pathogens are used as biological control products. Most of these require special handling or application techniques in order to be fully effective. Bacillus thuringiensis or Bt is a common bacterium that kills many types of caterpillars. However, cutworms in turf are apparently not affected by Bt. Recently discovered Bt strains have activity against white grubs, and products containing these strains are under development. Bacillus papilii. Several bacterial diseases attack white grubs and cause their blood fluids to turn a milky color. The best known of these is milky spore disease caused by the bacterium, Bacillus papilii. It is commercially available but only infects Japanese beetle grubs, so make sure the grubs being treated are actually those of Japanese beetles. Japanese beetle milky spore disease is applied to the turf as a powder or granule. The bacterial spores work their way into the turf where they are eaten by grubs. Although it takes several weeks or months before enough bacterial spores are in the soil to protect against grub damage, once the spores are established they seem to last up to 20 years. Chemical control. Chemical control tactics rely mainly on insecticides. However, insecticides have changed dramatically in recent years, and you need to use special care to get the maximum performance from them. Irrigation and pesticides. Read the product label to find out if an insecticide should be watered in. In general, most insecticides targeted for chinch bugs, green bugs, mites, and sod webworms should be on the leaf surface or in the top layers of thatch and should not be watered in. Most soil insecticides for control of white grubs or billbugs need to get as far into or through the thatch layer as possible. Soon after an insecticide application is made for grubs, apply water until the top inch of soil under the thatch layer is wet. When the soil is dry, insects like white grubs and mole crickets burrow deeper into the soil and are hard to control. Irrigating before the pesticide is applied helps move these insects closer to the soil surface where they are more likely to encounter the insecticide. Granular formulations must be rained on or irrigated to activate the pesticide. Granular formulations are often preferred where you can't irrigate because granules last longer than liquid formulations while waiting for rain. Hints for chemical control. 1. Do not expect an insecticide or any other pesticide to provide 100% control. Choose an insecticide based on its label and on its performance under your local conditions. 2. Apply the insecticide when the insect is in its most vulnerable stage. 3. Be sure equipment is calibrated accurately and that application patterns are well planned to avoid skips and overlaps. 4. Do not use insecticides where they will run off the site or get into ponds, streams, or drains. Do not apply insecticides when heavy rain will cause runoff or when wind will cause drift. 5. In general, liquid applications seem to perform better for control of the insects that feed on turf leaves and stems. Test your knowledge. 1. Which of these methods will not help monitor cutworms? A. Soap and water. B. Light traps. C. Pheromone traps. D. Pitfall traps. Answer D. Pitfall traps. 2. Apply an insecticide A, to get total eradication of turf pests. B. When the insect is at its most vulnerable stage. C. At any time during the pest life cycle. D. When granular formulations will stay dry for several days. Answer B. When the insect is at its most vulnerable stage. 3. Bacillus thuringiensis BTA, controls Japanese beetles. B. Attracts predators to the turf. C. Controls caterpillars. D. Controls mole crickets. Answer C. Controls caterpillars. 4. The milky spore disease bacterium A, is only effective against Japanese beetle grubs. B. Gives quick results. C. Controls many species of caterpillar. D. Makes turf look pale and stunted. Answer A. Is only effective against Japanese beetle grubs. 5. To control fire ants A, flood the mounds with water. B. Destroy the mounds and kill the queen. C. Mow less frequently. D. Use a combination of broadcast bait and mound treatments. Answer D. Use a combination of broadcast bait and mound treatments. 6. An insecticide applied to control white grubs A, will work best on the leaf surface. B. Should be applied to dry soil. C. Should be watered in to reach the soil. D. Will work best on a thick thatch layer. Answer C. Should be watered in to reach the soil. 7. Mole crickets A, are a minor problem in warm season grasses. B. Are found by monitoring pheromone traps. C. Are damaging only in the adult stage. D. Have only one generation per year. Answer D. Have only one generation per year. Answers: 1D, 2B, 3C, 4A, 5D, 6C, 7D.